Coming up on KCCI 8 News Close Up, the first funnel week of the 2025 legislative session is over. What bills are still alive and what did not make it past the do or die deadline? And hear what Republican and Democratic leaders say about the year so far and their plans for the rest of session.
Having people like us at the table, it matters.
Fighting for a more inclusive future. We sit down with a group representing people of color at the Iowa State House, why they say they're pushing to preserve history and drive change for their constituents across the state.
This is Iowa's news leader. This is KCCI 8 News Close Up.
Good morning and thanks for joining us for KCCI 8 News Close Up. I'm Chief Political Reporter Amanda Rooker. Last week brought a flurry of action to the Iowa State House. Lawmakers raced to meet the first funnel deadline of the 2025 legislative session. Now that deadline weeds out bills that don't have as much support, that cuts down what's left for lawmakers to work on. Bills that did not advance through a full committee in either the House or Senate by last Friday are likely dead for the rest of session. Now there are a few exceptions to this rule. Tax-related and spending bills are not impacted by this deadline, so they can be brought up at any point in the legislative session. Also, lawmakers and leadership can bring back bills by adding them into the budget later or adding them as amendments to other proposals that did make it through funnel. Now, several bills squeezed through in the last few days, but there were a handful that did not make it through that funnel deadline. That includes a bill that would have made it a misdemeanor to sleep or camp on public property. It also would have allowed local governments to create homeless encampments in public areas like parking lots. Also, a bill to eliminate the Natural Resources and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund did not make it through the funnel deadline. Neither did House Study Bill 97. That would have required Iowa schools to change any references to the Gulf of Mexico in classroom materials to Gulf of America and make Denali Mount McKinley. Senate File 320 did also not advance through committee. That would have brought back the death penalty in Iowa for people convicted of first-degree murder of a peace officer. Now, several bills to restrict pipeline projects did survive the funnel deadline. Last Thursday, the House Judiciary Committee advanced 4 proposals to stop the use of eminent domain for carbon capture pipelines and protect people who intervene in Iowa Utilities Commission proceedings. Another bill that's heading to the House floor would ban the, quote, intentional emission of chemicals into the air for the purpose of changing the weather, that is sometimes referred to as chemtrails. Now, House Study Bill 262 also advanced through committee. It would lower the age limit to carry a gun from 21 years old to 18. And a bill that would allow high school Bible classes in Iowa public schools also advanced through committee. The classes would not be mandatory and would need approval from the school district's board of directors. A lot of legislation that will continue to track. Republican and Speaker of the Iowa House, Pat Grassley, says he feels confident in the work that his party has accomplished so far.
We've continued to come in and try to address the issues that we think are extremely important. Now, some of those are going to be, like cost of living, for example, issues that we've been talking about. You're going to start seeing more of those conversations. We consider property tax to be kind of the driver in tax relief for Iowans this year. We're hoping to find some resolution for. But I think if higher ed committee, for example, was something that we talked about earlier in session, the bills that were proposed in that committee, nearly all of them, whether they had amendments or not, worked their way through the process. So we feel we accomplished some things. Some of the other things we talked about coming into session, like federal and other funds, also getting more autonomy for the state when it comes to this new administration. I think you've seen some bills move this week that would work towards that direction. And so I think at this point we're continuing on pace. We know we have a lot of work left to do to get those things done. And some of those will also be budget and tax related. So at this point, not every one of those is out there yet, but we know we still have more things to do.
Iowa Democrats say they are disappointed with many of the bills that Republicans have moved forward. They say most of the legislation does not address the top issues Iowans are facing.
It is time to give Iowa's workers a better deal. After years of lax workplace protections, the gutting of collective bargaining rights, and reduced unemployment benefits, Iowa Democrats have always been the party of working Iowans, and we are proud to continue standing in solidarity with the workers who power our state's economic engine.
We are, of course, frustrated because so many of the bills that have passed, and there have been so many, are focused on anything but lowering costs for Iowa families. We know that we've put forward legislation to make housing more affordable, healthcare more affordable, and childcare more affordable. None of those moved forward. No efforts to do that moved forward. Instead, we have seen bills like immunity for pesticide companies, putting school librarians in jail, restricting vaccines, requiring physicians to lie to their patients about abortion reversal, things that are not what Iowans tell us they want.
Still to come on Close Up, President Trump's latest moves on tariffs and why Iowa's agriculture secretary says he's optimistic that tariffs are a short-term pain for a long-term gain. Welcome back to Close Up. Last week brought more back and forth on tariffs. That sparked some more conversation in Iowa about the potential impact on investors, business leaders, the ag economy, and everyday consumers. After allowing 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada to take effect, on Thursday, President Donald Trump signed executive actions to suspend some of those tariffs. The president's order puts in place a nearly 1-month tariff delay until April 2nd. That delay is on all products from both countries that are covered by the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement. Trump made the announcement following a call with Mexico's president and discussions with Canadian officials. Now, about 50% of imports from Mexico and 36% from Canada are covered under the agreement. Goods tied to the auto industry are covered by the tariff delay, but energy from Canada is not, so a lower 10% tariff does stay in place. Iowa's Secretary of Agriculture, Mike Naig, says he's hopeful that the trade war won't last long. But he does say crop producers may face one of the toughest economies in 100 years. Naig says tariffs come with a lot of uncertainty, and he says bargaining chips could open the door to long-term profits for farmers. He's concerned that trade wars could make things worse for farmers, but says a pause in tariffs could suggest that they won't last long.
I think it's legitimate to be able to say, we hope that these are short-lived and temporary. I have met with many farmers over the last few days who literally will say to me, some short-term pain for long-term gain.
During President Trump's speech to Congress last Tuesday, he did address farmers. He told them that his trade policy may cause a, quote, adjustment period.
Our new trade policy will also be great for the American farmer. I love the farmer. It may be a little bit of an adjustment period. We had that before when I made the deal with China, $50 billion of purchases, and I said, just bear with me, and they did. They did. Probably have to bear with me again, and this will be even better.
KCCI also spoke with the president of the Iowa Farmers Union. He says U.S. trade policy should instead consider the needs of everyone in the ag industry. A USDA report released this year details 2023 numbers, and it shows China, Canada, and Mexico were the largest markets for U.S. agriculture exports. Lehman says trade relationships like those take years to build, and if they're harmed, it would impact them. but it would also impact farm manufacturers and consumers. John Deere, for example, recently had another round of layoffs, and the company says that came from a lack of demand for farm equipment. Lehman says tariffs could cause a negative domino effect all across the industry.
That means that farmers are less likely to invest back in their farm, whether that be improving their equipment or their facilities, or whether it's trying to bring in the next generation onto the farm. All those things kind of get put on pause when you have this much uncertainty.
Lehman also says consumers can expect to see higher prices at stores, especially if countries choose to enact retaliatory tariffs. He does call President Trump's pause a, quote, positive step. When Close Up comes back, I sit down with a group of lawmakers who say they're making history at the State House, why they also say more work needs to be done to represent Iowans of color. Welcome back to Close Up. From the federal level down to the state level, there are a lot of changes being considered to diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. A certain group at the State House says those changes may particularly impact people of color. I sat down with this group, Iowa's Legislative Black Caucus, to talk about what those changes may be, how they're thinking about that legislation, but also the goals of their organization. Talking about the Iowa Legislative Black Caucus, when did that initially start? What was the initial mission?
When I first got to the Capitol in 2011, Representative Akeo Abdul-Samad was already pushing for a black caucus, a caucus that represented not only black Iowans, but all people of color in Iowa. That was 2011. In 2018, we finally established our caucus with 4 founding members, Akeo Abdul-Samad, Ross Smith, Phyllis Thiede, and myself. We didn't really do a whole lot other than talk until 2020, when the George Floyd incident happened. And we are the primary reason why Iowa now has a chokehold built, and we're very proud of that.
How did you two get involved with the caucus?
I saw the need to, there are bills that represent African Americans and other marginalized people in a poor way. You may have a great idea, but if you have not worked in the community to see the day-to-day living experiences of people, it may not work for them.
The majority race does not always see what could be damaging to us because they haven't had the experience. So our job is to look at those bills with a fine-tooth comb and then bring it up, and then teach and educate how it will be hurtful to all of us. And that's one of our primary roles as a Black Caucus, to teach and show this is not good. They need our voices at the table.
For me, simply put, we sit in a chamber of 100 people, and at the push of our button, 3 million people's lives will be affected.
True.
3 million. At the push of those buttons on our desk, 3 million people's lives will be affected, whether they supported it or whether they didn't. You have people all over this state who are counting on us to pull something out that will affect their lives, no matter what. And so before we push that button, the immense responsibility for us is there, whether you are in our district or not. That responsibility is on us as well.
Do you have an example of legislation that you're working to bring attention to that may have an impact that the lawmakers who introduced it may not have thought of when they introduced it, or any other work that you feel is significant right now this legislative session?
The most recent thing is DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Collectively, we make up the state. Collectively, we have a history. And so we're trying to keep that bond that we have, also showing the culture and the history and the impact of African Americans. It's not to diminish any other group, but to show that you're part of and the making of this state, the making of this country. And so sometimes people have a hard time with that. They think that someone's getting a special privilege, when in fact, they bring a lot to the table. We all bring something to the table.
You can be a citizen in this state and live your entire life in this state, not ever having any interactions or strong adherences to minority culture. And that's one of the biggest problems that I have seen as a legislator ever since I've been at the Capitol. What we're trying to do as a caucus is to make sure that people go back and check their history books, check why we are successful today and what we stand to lose as a state, as a country, if we disregard what we've already achieved. And this is what this particular bill will do. It will totally disregard what has been achieved in over 200 years in this country.
We have diversity because there was a lack of diversity. We have equity because there was no equity, you know, in terms of disabilities even. People believe people with disabilities couldn't do a lot of things, and there's so many things that they can do. And when we look at their disability, it can be in some works, some jobs, an asset. And so it's how you look at people and how they're able to use their talents too.
Look at a race where somebody is running the 200 meter. And in the 200 meter, you start on this side and you're coming around the track to finish on this side. Imagine the gun going off and a certain group of people were held at the starting line while another group got 100 meters ahead. And then while they were on their way to the finish line, this group was now allowed to go. And now what happens is you try to slow down this group so that this group can catch up. And then once they do, everybody can then make their way to the finish line together. But instead, what we're trying to do is figure it out. We're trying to play political games with people's lives and with children, with books, and by using trigger words and trigger statements. Instead, let's just treat people right. Let's just give everybody a fair opportunity.
The three of you are Democratic representatives. Republicans are in the majority. What do you say to people who wonder, does it matter voicing concerns, voicing your perspective doesn't matter when it seems like Republicans continue to push what they feel like is going to help the state from their perspective, despite the concerns that you bring up.
It's the vote. There's power in the vote. And so I tell people that to listen to what people say, to see how it affects your life, your children.
When we look at policies, doesn't matter whether it's Democrat or Republican, we have to look at how the policy will affect us all.
We give people hope. A lot of people that I really don't know, I can be sitting in a restaurant or shopping and someone will walk up to me and say, "I'm glad you're there." I'll say, "Why?" "Because you're a good one, and I know that you're going to vote for the right thing." That makes me feel so wonderful. Yeah. I can be at the Capitol and feel as defeated as possible, but when I walk the streets, I know that people are looking and listening and watching, and I give them hope. And that's all I need to keep going.
We have to continue to lock in on the promises and the hope and the faith and the aspirations that our forefathers presented, and they were successful. And so we will be successful too. Our children will be successful too.
If anybody asks you, does it matter? It does.
And we hope that through our work and through our presence, more young people will aspire to be legislators. You know, we've grown now. 7 doesn't seem like a large number, but 4 to 7 in a short amount of time is pretty good.
When you look at the history of the Iowa legislature, just the House of Representatives itself, from the data that we were able to get, I would make the 20th African American state elected official, whether Democrat or Republican. I would make the 20th out of the entire history of Iowa. These things matter. Yeah. Showing up matters. Having people like us at the table, it matters.
Our conversation with Iowa's Legislative Black Caucus continues. We talk about what they're taking away from the last election. If we look back at this past election, Black voters supported Democrats in lower numbers compared to previous elections. Now, that's not specific to Iowa, that's across the country. But what does that tell you about what Black Americans want from their government?
And I think this year there was some tiredness, some folks were lethargic with the system, feeling as if they had nothing else to give and that they were tired of seeing the same stuff. They were tired of all of the rhetoric. They were tired of fighting. People felt beat up. I don't necessarily think it had anything to do with like the Democratic Party. I think it just had a lot to do with where we are right now. But the truth is it also means for the Democratic Party that we have work to do, that we need to get out here and go and get people and meet people where they are. Malcolm X said, we are not outnumbered, we are just simply out-strategized. And so this gives us the opportunity to come up with a strategy that will bring people back into the fold. No matter who you are, no matter what you look like, we can show you that there's a space for you, there's a space for your idea, that you will be heard and seen.
When you break down the specifics, the specific demographics within the demographic of Black voters, you see that specifically young male Black voters, Trump received double the amount of votes from young Black men than he did in 2020.
He did.
What does that say about young Black men and what they want and how they feel about the Democratic Party right now?
It means that we got to go back to them and we have to talk to them about the policies. We have to inform them on what's going on, what's happening, and why we believe that the policies on one side may not be good for them, even though it may look attractive. So when you're up against certain things is simple marketing, right? I can make something feel like I relate to you. I can make you feel like I relate to you. And then once I get in there, I show you that we are very different and that you are not, and that I am not who you thought I was. But what we're trying to show folks and what we're trying to show young Black men is that, hey, there's a home for you here.
I think a lot of the message in young Black men voting for Donald Trump is a sexism issue. I think if the other person running had been a male, they may have voted Democratic.
What we got was more of a TV show, a talent, and it was broadcast widely, and people, people like a good show. But what we're getting now is the reality of the show. He said, we're going to make America great again. Great for who? And people will start looking, how does this affect me? How are my kids better? How is what happened, And so they'll put themselves in the play that's going on and seeing that they're not getting the benefits that they should be getting, just as everyday citizens, and vote the way that they should. Not necessarily for me, vote for the people who are going to impact your life in a positive way.
Well, thank you for being here for this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, I enjoyed it.
Representative Eddie Andrews is the only Republican Black lawmaker in the Iowa House. He was unavailable for an interview, but did send KCCI this statement, writing in part, quote, Black Iowans are not a monolith. We believe in a merit-based approach where every Iowan is treated equally. Hard work is rewarded and opportunity is open to all. After talking with thousands of Iowans, I am not surprised that Black Iowans, Hispanics, and other minorities have listened to both parties and decided to increase their support for conservative Republicans. Thank you for joining us for KCCI 8 News Close Up. Have a great day.